What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R for a third straight game where the Kraken do play really well on the road. Unfortunately, this one does not end the way that we would like it to. It's honestly kind of a bit of a bummer. The Kraken played really well on the second half of a back-to-back, definitely the best of their 5 times playing on the second half of a back-to-back so far this season against a very good and playing well at the moment New Jersey Devils team who were coming in on a couple days rest at home. The Kraken gave the Devils everything that they could handle, and still the Devils managed to get a couple of bounces and come away with this one. It's a game that, although the shots on goal might tell a different story, honestly, I think the shots on goal really don't tell the story of this game. It was a pretty evenly played game as far as the overall chances or danger of the overall chances. The Kraken not getting as much volume towards the net, but certainly making the most of their opportunities. Markstrom had a couple of very nice saves in this game, and like I said, the Kraken, a couple of bounces that didn't go their way. Granted, 1 or 2 of them might have been a bit self-inflicted. Still, one of them was just an absolutely lucky bounce for New Jersey to get their second goal. We'll go over it in a little bit more detail, but yeah, the Kraken, I honestly feel like deserve to come away with at least 1 point in this game. It's hard to necessarily say that they deserve to win it, especially when they did get outshot by as much as they did. And even though shots don't tell the full story, it was a pretty significant margin, and Grubauer played very well in net for the Kraken to make sure that this game didn't turn into a lopsided mess. Even with that, though, the Kraken did play pretty well in their end of the ice for the most part, making sure that those chances the Devils got were, for the most part, from the outside and not particularly dangerous. Grubauer did have a couple of pretty nice saves that he had to make, especially in the third period. The Devils started to turn, even kind of early in the second period, and then throughout most of the third, the Devils started to pick their spots a little bit more once they could see that Grubauer was on his game. I don't know if they came into the game with the mindset that, knowing Grubauer was coming off of his probably worst start of his career in that game against San Jose, that maybe they just figured throw as many pucks at the net regardless of how dangerous the chance is, and test him a lot early on to see if maybe that has stuck around since that game, at least to some degree. Again, fortunately it didn't. Grubauer had a fantastic game, really played excellent for the Kraken. Had just one mistake, and it might have been a little bit aided by one of his teammates trying to help out, or was definitely aided by one of his teammates trying to help out, but there might have been a little bit of involvement from another one. We'll get to that, but overall the Kraken, I think, certainly deserved to get at least to overtime in this game. Unfortunately, that's just not the way it would go. It wasn't their night. The bounces weren't going their way. And although it was a well-fought, close game, in the end, the result is the same. It's a regulation loss for the Kraken. Anyway, getting into the game a little bit more specifically and taking this a little bit more moment by moment, with a couple of changes in the lineup for the Kraken coming into this one, with it being the second half of a back-to-back. Yanni Gourde doesn't end up playing. He didn't play the majority of the third period in the previous one. It sounded like, from what Bylsma said before the game, that they don't expect this to be anything long-term. Whether or not he plays against the Rangers, I think, might be a game-time decision. Although that does come after a day's rest. It's also an afternoon game, so it turns out to be 3 games in 3.5 days for the Kraken. So we'll see if Gourde plays in that one. He didn't play in this one. Basically said that they don't want whatever it is that he's dealing with to turn into something more. So then, with Gourde out, Burakovsky steps back into Gourde's spot, or I should say into Gourde's new spot, which is alongside Beniers. Now that line looks pretty much the same as it did when Burakovsky was in the lineup, just with the difference of Schwartz on the other wing rather than McCann. And well, it turns out that worked out pretty well early on in the game. We'll get to that, though. One other change in the lineup: Evans slots into the defensive end after 2 games with a minor injury of his own. He comes back in. Mahura heads out. I think Mahura's been playing very well, but you got 7 defensemen, and Mahura is clearly the 7th. So, yeah, Evans back. It was good to see him back. He didn't, I think, have a huge necessarily effect on this game, but still, overall, a better defenseman and certainly a bigger part of the team's future than Mahura, so you're not going to keep Evans on the bench if he's healthy enough to go. And of course, the other change being Grubauer net instead of Decord, second half of back-to-back, and we've already talked about Grubauer having a pretty good game. As we do get into the game, things are pretty back and forth for the majority of the first period. The Devils certainly getting more volume towards the net, but this was kind of the story of the game overall, and it played out most, I would say, in this first period, where the Devils, tons of volume, but not a lot of dangerous chances. Meanwhile, the Kraken, not nearly as much volume, but we're getting some good chances. the best of which ends up scoring for them. Andrei Burakovsky doing it pretty much all himself as Dunn gets the pass up to him, still around the Kraken blue line, and Burakovsky just goes straight through the neutral zone. Maybe not straight, a little bit of a weave and moving his way through. Comes up to the blue line as he enters the offensive end, the Devils' end. He's got 3 defensemen in front of him, and this, it has to be said, there's a role to be played here by just some really bad back-checking by the Devils, as the 3 wide defense just let Burakovsky right past all 3 of them. They all just kind of watch him skate between them. He gets up to the net, fires off a shot perfectly placed to the top side far corner over the glove hand of Markstrom to give the Kraken the 1-0 lead. So Burakovsky, go figure, after a few games off, he comes in and scores his second of the season right away. Obviously, seemed to make a pretty big difference to him. Big smile on his face after that goal, and you know that that one felt pretty good, even if after the game he wasn't willing to go quite that far, especially after a loss. It's still ultimately the goal is to win the game, but we know that that one felt good for Burakovsky. He's also now the 3rd Kraken player, especially if this continues, that has come back after a couple of games as a healthy scratch, with Bjorkstrand being the first. Then Shane Wright saw the same thing, that has come back and immediately looked better than when they left. Now, Burakovsky, honestly, I don't think he was playing that badly when they scratched him, but clearly the scoring wasn't happening, and they are looking for a little bit more offense out of him. So while he wasn't costing them back the other way, I think they wanted to see him shore up a little bit more what he was trying to do offensively, maybe get a little bit more practice reps in before getting back into game action. With the Gord injury, they don't really have another choice. Burakovsky goes back in, and at least early on here, he gets the Kraken on the board first, just past the halfway point of the first period. A few minutes later, though, or maybe even not quite that, pretty quickly after the Kraken take the 1-0 lead, the Devils will get it back. And this one honestly just comes off of a nice play by a couple of young, skilled players for the Devils, who also happen to share a last name, as Jack Hughes gets it down to Luke Hughes as he comes deep down into the offensive end on the far side, the blocker side for Grubauer. Takes a shot from the low faceoff dot, and just like Burakovsky at the other end before him, he puts it perfectly placed over the shoulder of Grubauer on the glove side, or blocker side, over the blocker side, near side, so not quite exactly the same shot, but similar to what Burakovsky scored on. Luke Hughes scores on Grubauer. Just a really well-placed shot. I don't think there's a lot more you could ask for Grubauer from here. Maybe a little bit closer to the shot, maybe played a little bit higher, but honestly, I think you just got to tip your cap to a really nice shot from Luke Hughes here, and that does tie the game at 1. The rest of the first period is kind of more of the same. The Devils just racking up the shot total, but not much else very dangerous. Meanwhile, the Kraken do get a couple of other pretty good chances in on Markstrom. He has to make a couple nice saves, one of which does rebound out, and Burakovsky, if it hadn't bounced over his stick, might have had his second of the period, but we do get to the first intermission with the score tied at 1. Then a few minutes into the second period, the Kraken get their first chance on the power play, with the Devils having had 1 in the first period, which the Kraken killed off pretty well. This is a good Devils power play, and while special teams have been an issue for the Kraken pretty much all season long, especially the power play for the Kraken has been the biggest issue, but even the penalty kill has not been very good for the Kraken here lately, giving up some power play goals to power plays that have struggled throughout the season. And just generally, the penalty kill has kind of gone the same way as the power play. It has been rough at both ends of the special teams for the Kraken over the last couple weeks, but it was very good in this game. The Kraken kill off that first Devils power play and would kill off another one later on in the second period, I do believe. But before that, the Kraken get their first power play here, like I said, a few minutes in. And on that power play, with the first unit still out on the ice around the minute mark, about halfway through this power play, and I say first unit, it might be the second unit. It's hard to really say. It's the unit that has Shane Wright on it, which right now might as well be the first unit because, well, if the Kraken are going to score a power play goal, it seems like it's going to be Wright, and that's just what happens here. As first of all, Wright does a good job to keep an errant pass in the offensive end. He has to reach, almost dive, but put his stick along the ice and really reach out to make sure that this puck stays in the offensive end. He gets it back up to the corner where it ends up down the boards. The Kraken do a good job to fight it off from the boards and keep possession of it, as Schwartz is able to pass it between the legs of another one of the Kraken players, I'm pretty sure, but down into the corner where Tolvanen is. Tolvanen, a one-touch pass out in front of the net where Shane Wright is completely wide open and forgotten about by the Jersey penalty kill. Wright one times it into the net, gets it through the 5-hole of Markstrom to give the Kraken the power play goal, the 2-1 lead, and for Wright, his 4th now power play goal in, well, just over a week. Also his 6th of the season overall, but yeah, 4 power play goals here in the last week and a half, which accounts for 4 of the 5. So 80% of the power play goals the Kraken have since the 12th of November have been off of Shane Wright's sticks. So clearly it seems to be working to just let him try to find a way to get himself lost on that far side, make himself open, available for a pass, and it works like a charm here to give the Kraken that mid-period lead. Unfortunately, it's another lead that would not last for the Kraken, as the Devils do end up getting it back a few minutes later. This one isn't quite as quick of a response as the previous one, and this one is probably the worst of the bounces for the Kraken in this game. It's certainly the one that they are the least immediately responsible for of the 3 big scoring plays that end up deciding the game. It comes off a shot from, going completely off memory here, I want to say middle of the face-off circle, maybe high face-off circle, a bit towards the middle of the ice, but still pretty well out. It would be generally a save that you'd expect a goaltender to make, but Grubauer is screened very effectively with another Devils player right in front of him, uncontested. So he has to lean to one side and try and see the shot coming. The shot goes to the other side, and he still makes a very nice play here to get his blocker to the other side, block that shot. Unfortunately, even with the nice save to work through the screen, it goes off of Grubauer's blocker, then off of Larsson's shin, midsection, either way off of Larsson on the far side of the crease and into the net to give the Devils the second goal of the game and tie things up here in the second period. So I mean, go figure, even when Grubauer is playing very well, he can't get a bounce at his end of the ice or the other one to help him out a little bit. And unfortunately, this, like I said, does become one of the big 3 game-deciding plays that could have easily gone the other way. It's just an unfortunate bounce for the Kraken, a lucky bounce for the Devils, and, well, what can you say? When things go well for a team, they tend to go well in a lot of different ways, including with the luck side of things, and that's definitely what happens here. The score would remain 2-2 throughout the rest of the second period, which does include the second Devils power play of the game. The Kraken killed that one off with some help from Grubauer. He had to come up pretty big, really on both penalty kills for the Kraken. He had to make some nice saves, especially the one in the first period. Grubauer had quite a few in-tight saves that he had to make, not on wide-open shots, but a lot of times the puck found its way bouncing around in the crease, and Grubauer either was able to swipe it aside or freeze it to get another face-off. So he was a big part of these 2 successful penalty kills for the Kraken. Moving on to the third, though, unfortunately, the only goal in the third period would be the deciding one, and it would go the way of the Devils. It's another one that, while this one is a little bit more self-inflicted, is kind of just the Devils lucking into one. As there's a puck bouncing around the net, Grubauer is able to get his stick to it. He tries to shove it over to his glove to get his glove on it and get the freeze and a face-off in their end. And I don't know, it looked like on the replay, I tried to rewind it, there's not really a good angle, but it looks like as Stevenson is also trying to get his stick to that puck and just clear it out of the zone, it looked like Stevenson might have gotten Grubauer's stick as he's trying to push the puck, so maybe that ends up pushing Grubauer's stick a little bit harder than he was intending to. Whatever the case is, though, whether Grubauer did it all by himself or if there's a bit of bad luck here of just sticks colliding and that puck ends up sliding a little bit faster than Grubauer is anticipating, the puck slides past Grubauer's glove as he puts it on the ice out to the far side, where it does go to Vince Dunn, so it doesn't go straight to a Devil player, but Dunn not necessarily expecting the puck to end up right at his feet. So Dunn then tries to do the right thing by getting the puck behind the net where it can do a lot less damage, or at least it's much less immediately dangerous. Unfortunately, he gets a little bit too much of it, and I think he even gets a second hit on it. I think his first one would have just straight up own goal, put it in the Kraken net. He gets enough of it to at least make it go off the post, but it has the same effect as it goes off the post into the crease behind Grubauer, where, yeah, it's just a very easy goal there for Timo Meier. He is able to whack it home to give the Devils the 3-2 lead. The Kraken would fight back throughout the rest of the third period, creating some more good chances and even getting a little bit more shot volume on top of that in this back half of the third as they try to even things up. And they do come away with one golden opportunity to tie things up late in the third, as I want to say it's Jaden Schwartz that gets the puck down to Montour as he dives down deep into the offensive end. He ends up one-on-one with Markstrom in front of the net, makes a beautiful move to deke around Markstrom, just dangles the puck in front of him from one side to the other, has a gaping open net to shoot at, and just on the backhand hooks it a little bit too much, puts it through the blue paint and out the other side without even hitting the post. So he ends up missing the wide open net that would have ended up tying the game and likely sent it to overtime at the very least, where then the Kraken have a chance to win it. But yeah, again, at least potentially come out with 1 point, or at least are guaranteed if you make it to overtime to come out with 1 point in the standings. And given the hole that they dug themselves with those games around Thanksgiving, they could really use every point in the standings that they can get their hands on, even if they are loser points for overtime losses. Unfortunately, though, between the bounce off Larsson's leg, the misplay between Grubauer and Dunn that just finds its way wide open in the crease in front of a double player, and then this missed free goal by Montour. I shouldn't say free. He did have to make a pretty nice play to even set up the potential for what, well, let's be honest, at that point should have been a free goal. Either way, 3 chances for the Kraken that if you do them again, probably don't go the same way. They all go the way of the Devils, and in the end, that's enough for the Devils to sneak away with a 3-2 win. And yes, I know that saying the Devils snuck away with a 3-2 win, given how massively they outshot the Kraken, might seem a little weird, but overall, even the expected goals agree that the overall danger of chances point to the Devils. I would say still the general flow of play, the Devils were the better team and probably did deserve to win the game just by how the game was progressing. Though even at that, I would say maybe an overtime win because the Kraken stuck with them the entire way. Again, maybe shot volume wasn't there, but the Kraken creating a lot of dangerous opportunities, making Markstrom work in net just as much as Grubauer was working for the Kraken. Grubauer just had a few more go off of him that weren't as high danger. Well, quite a few more. It was pretty lopsided in the shot category. Anyway, all in all, in the end with this game, it was a very well played game for the Kraken. And I think there's a lot of good takeaways to come out from this game, or at least positive takeaways for the Kraken to come away with from this game. I think they can definitely leave with their heads held high that they left everything out on the ice on the second half of a back-to-back against a very good Devils team who, even outside of being a good team playing well, is also a team that, when they're playing their best, like to play a fast-paced game moving up and down the ice. And while that is something that with the new system, the Kraken also generally like to play that type of game, it's a little bit harder to keep up with when you're coming off of a game the previous night, as I want to say it was Burakovsky pointed out, although he was free to admit that he was not one of the guys. He and Evans coming in a little bit more fresh than the rest. Certainly, since he wasn't coming off an injury like Evans, he might have been the most fresh in this game, aside from Philip Grubauer, I suppose. But the rest of the team still had that game in their legs from the night before, so maybe not quite as easy for them to keep up with the Devils throughout the entire game. And I think we saw that a bit in the third. And even earlier on in the game, while the Kraken were getting some very good chances, they were able to turn a lot of the Devils' aggressive offensive pressure back the other way and get some odd man rushes. They had a 3-on-1 in the second period where Burakovsky ends up shooting it high. They had a couple 2-on-1s. They had at least one breakaway. Speaking of breakaways, the biggest breakaway of the game came in the third period with the game still tied. It was a Jack Hughes breakaway, so probably the most dangerous player for the Devils to have a breakaway, and Grubauer had a big save on that one, so just another feather in Grubauer's cap from this game. But overall, the Kraken definitely had their chances, but they were mostly created off of the rush. They didn't spend nearly as much time set up in the offensive end and cycling the puck, forcing the Devils to be in their end while the Kraken can roll a change. The kind of thing that we saw them do to great success throughout the game against the Islanders, where they were able to pin the Islanders into their own end, and even were able to do against Carolina in that game. There wasn't nearly as much of that in this one, and I think that did have a bit to do with maybe a little bit more fatigue than the team that they were up against. Again, though, even there, and maybe that's using the second half of a back-to-back as a little bit too much of an excuse. Certainly the players and coaches generally don't think much of second half of back-to-backs, at least what they divulge to media anyway. Though I will say Bielsma was at least able to point out that this one might have been a little bit more difficult than some other second half of back-to-backs that they'll have throughout the season and have already had, because of specifically the opponent that they were up against, the way that opponent likes to play, how good that opponent has been to this point in the season, and with it also being a road back-to-back, which actually pretty much all of the back-to-backs the Kraken have this season are road back-to-backs. Even the one that they had that ended at home started on the road, so that's another back-to-back with travel. Either way, there's a lot of factors that lead to the Kraken coming into this with a bit of a disadvantage. And even at that, this was, of the 5 back-to-backs the Kraken have had, this was easily the best second half of one that they've played so far. Coming off of, honestly, probably the best first half of a back-to-back they played as well. The only other one that I think they even won was the first half of the first back-to-back. That was the game that they won in the shootout against the Wild, who, as it turns out, are a pretty good team in their own right. So, yeah, it's good to see the Kraken not look like a tired team that was just getting run out of the rink all game long like they have in some of those other second half of back-to-backs. The first three, they got shut out 2-0, so they just weren't able to create any offense. And then, well, we know what happened in the last one against the Sharks. And finally, then we'll close things out with the Kraken 3 stars, as always brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you want to help decide Kraken 3 stars after the games, you can help support a little bit more than you already are by going to the link down below in the description and supporting on Patreon as well. The first star in this one for me, I'm going to go with Andrei Burakovsky, just for, I mean, he's the third guy that's done it for the Kraken this season, but for being able to come back. Who knows if it's when the Kraken would have had him come back otherwise, but he comes back from the gourd injury, steps into that first line role, and had a very good game, I would say. I think there are still some places that he said after the game that he was maybe still a bit nervous in the first couple of shifts, just a little bit of rust there to knock off getting back into game action. But he obviously got back into it in a big way with that first goal halfway through the first period, and then had a couple of other good chances later on. I'm sure he'd like to put the 3-on-1 rush shot on net rather than over it, but generally a good game from Burakovsky. I will say one thing that I don't know if it feels right to mention it, but it was at least a little bit amusing and seemed like a bad omen at the time that his first shift out on the ice, he steps on the ice for the first time after being healthy scratched a couple times in a row, and immediately tripped over the blue line, just slipped and fell right out on the ice there in his first shift, but obviously got back up, and the rest of the game he played very well for the Kraken. Second star, I'll go with Philip Grubauer. I think an absolutely huge bounce back game from him, and an important bounce back game from him. Even if the result turns out to be ultimately the same in the standings for the Kraken, it's another loss. I don't think it really has a ton to do with Grubauer. Sure, you'd like him to maybe freeze that one puck that then ends up getting put behind him by Vince Dunn. But a fantastic game from Grubauer. He had a number of very good saves, so I think he can excuse his portion of that second goal to some degree, or at least it's made up for it by the nice saves that he made elsewhere in the game. And just in general, very important just for him to be able to bounce back and have a performance like this one, where even statistically he had a fantastic night, which has not always been the case with Grubauer. I think he's had some strong games before with the Kraken where just the quality of shots that he faces mean that his stats look horrible. I don't know how much he reads into that. Some players look at stats more than others, but I think it would be hard for him to feel bad about how he played in this one, and coming off of that last game that I think even he probably could recognize was one of the worst games he's probably ever played at the goaltender position. I think that it's an important mental thing for him to be able to then fully put that game in the past and know that that's not going to affect, at least that single game is not going to affect him going forward. And then as for the third star, I think there's a few options here. None of them are particularly obvious, I would say, but I'm going to end up going with Shane Wright. I think he had another very good game. That line, once again, was producing for the Kraken. Maybe not every shift, and they, as a line at even strength, don't get on the score sheet, though two of them do with that Shane Wright goal. Unfortunately, Bjorkstrand has his point streak snapped, but both Tolvanen and Wright get on the score sheet with Wright's power play goal. And I mean, sure, it would be nice if somebody else could also score on the power play. The Kraken can't necessarily rely on only one guy scoring, but at least for right now, they're scoring at a pretty respectable rate on the power play. If you just look at the last 4 or 5 games now, their power play has actually been pretty good statistically, which is not something that we could say for certainly the almost a month before then, or really the entire rest of the season. But Wright scoring, or Wright's hot stick has pretty much single-handedly revived this Kraken power play. Single-handedly, it's a team effort. It's not like really any of Wright's goals were single-handed efforts. He gets good passes on just about all of them, but still it's Wright putting up the shots, Wright getting himself in the correct spots to be in, to receive those passes and take off those dangerous shots. So good to see Wright getting involved there on the power play, making a big difference. In the special teams, just generally special teams for the Kraken had a fantastic game for the second night in a row. The 2 kills, 1 power play score, so they, I'm pretty sure, went perfect on the night special teams wise, which is not something that we've seen very much this season. We've seen a couple times the other way around, but yeah, I think I feel pretty good about those. Burakovsky, the first star, Grubauer the second, and Wright the third. Let me know down in the comment section if I forgot anything. I'm sure I did. This is a little bit more off the top of the head than I usually do these. Again, I appreciate you sticking with maybe some less than ideal audio, a little bit more echoey in a small enclosed room here than I'm used to. I also don't have quite as much opportunity to edit the audio. I have a little bit more of a setup that I can manipulate at my normal setup back at home, but we're making it work, getting some good experience here out on the road, and it's been fun to see some other arenas. Maybe I'll put a video together once all 3 of these are done about just kind of what the experience was like at these 3 arenas out here. Until then, though, again, love to hear your thoughts, who you thought were stars of the game, and until next time, from MSG, stay safe out there. Be good to each other. God bless. Go Kraken.